Hi, Mark Gilbert here. Thanks for clicking in. This video is entitled Spirituality, Politics, and the Coronavirus. What I'd like to offer you here for the next few minutes is a spiritual evolutionary perspective on the political polarization that we're currently faced, as well as the hot issue of the coronavirus currently going on in our society and around the world. What do we mean by a spiritual evolutionary perspective? Well, like all the videos on this channel, which are designed to give you tools and ideas for assisting with your spiritual evolution, what I often talk about is that we are these spiritual beings at our essence that are also living and having a human experience. We're living simultaneously in two worlds. We have one foot in a spiritual world, and we're growing and evolving in that particular world. But we're also in our day-to-day affairs living in a material, physical world as well. And so we need to understand this dual aspect of our nature, and that we are growing or evolving or developing in both areas of our life. Now, sometimes our physical material life can be so hypnotizing and so all-consuming that we forget our spiritual nature. And so for many times, a spiritual evolutionary response calls us to remember our spiritual truth and use that as a basis for our response in the physical world. But we also have situations where people can hide their head in the sand and not look at the material world and feel like they're such a deeply spiritual being that they don't respond with a sense of what's proper in the area of our material world. So what's key is to recognize that we're living in both worlds simultaneously and to choose responses that recognize that dual aspect of our nature. Our material world or physical world often especially throws a lot of fear at us. Our media is very good at this. If we turn on cable news or any of the news programs these days, we're being fed a steady diet of the coronavirus and its spread around the planet and fearful natures in which we should be looking at this. There's concerns that this is going to be just a major outbreak and killing millions of people. There's concerns about the lack of a proper response by our governments. And there's fears regarding people's response to the virus and the degree of hoarding of needed supplies and panic-type responses. So our media is continuously presenting to us these aspects of fear as it relates to the coronavirus. But similarly, in the area of political polarization, if we watch news much, then we will recognize how extremely divided our populace, especially here in the United States, is. There's a high degree of nationalism and racism that has arisen on one end, and another end is a very high end of a sense of wanting a political revolution or a political change that can address some of the inequities in our particular political system. Both of these aspects of what's being presented to us call us into a state of fear. There's a lot of the political pundits who want us to fear that Trump might get reelected, or there is fear that the democratic system is taking over from the people's desires to have Bernie Sanders nominated for the Democratic nomination. Or there's fears among people that Bernie and Bernie's desires for change and what he calls a political revolution is a degree of socialism or even a misunderstanding of socialism into calling it communism, such that there's fearful that there's going to be this negative change within the United States. Now, I'm not here to argue those political issues, but just to call attention to the fact that a lot of our political system and a lot of the political news that we get is calling us into this basis of fear, fearing what's going on out in the world, fearing the virus and fearing political polarization and our sense of what's being responded to in our political environment. What I'm calling you to do in this moment is to come to a degree of consciousness of the fact that our very nature of our media calls us to want to keep us watching the media, and that fear sells. Fear brings more response into the desire to be watching what's going on in the world. The more fearful we are of something, the more we're going to chase after getting more knowledge of it so we can feel more fearful. And so what I'd call you to do is to step back and be aware of the fact that an inundation of ourselves with the information coming from the media can overwhelm us in the world of the material and allow us to forget our spiritual world. So I ask you to sit back and have a degree of recognition of what's going on. As FDR so famously stated back in the 1940s, the only thing we have to fear is fear ourselves. I'd also like to share with you a quote from spiritual teacher Abraham Hicks, who writes, "Worrying is using your imagination to create something you don't want." Worrying is using your imagination to create something you don't want. At the basis of that statement and at the basis of our spiritual nature is a recognition that our thoughts, words, and deeds create our reality. And if we stay the course in terms of keeping attention and focus on fear, then we're going to get more fearful things mirrored back to us by our physical world. So our calling in this moment is to look at what might be a proper spiritual evolutionary response to the fear that's being presented to us by the world of affairs out there, the world of the media that desires to see us as a victim and keep us in victim consciousness. I'm asking you to look beyond that this day. So what is a proper response to the political polarization and the coronavirus information that's being presented to us these days? I'd call you to look at three considerations in your response. The first is a self-awareness of where you are in terms of your responding. Are you responding from a fear basis and being a victim to the world out there, that you're feeding into the fear of the media and your response is fear-based? Or are you hiding your head in the sand and you're ignoring all of that and you're saying, I'm a spiritual being and this is all going to work out and it doesn't matter what's going on in the world of the material? I'd ask you to find a common ground, a middle ground between the two, one that recognizes that you are growing and evolving in both your spiritual inner nature and in this outer world experience, and to make a wise choice. So then the choices that you're making have a responsibility within yourself, a responsibility to choose wisely, both in your response to the physical material world and your response to your spiritual nature and your spiritual truth. There was an interesting program a few weeks ago from John Oliver where he was talking about the coronavirus on his program. And in that, he was talking about the high levels of people whose choices ran the gamut from, as he described it, people who were so fearful of the coronavirus, they're discussing things like gargling or drinking bleach to kill it, which is not advisable. And on the other end of the spectrum were people who were so unconcerned about the virus that they were going around and licking the poles in subways. Well, obviously, either extreme is not a proper response to the virus. We don't want to be doing something that totally ignores the physical realities of what might be going on in the world of affairs. But we don't want to be so fearful that we're hiding away from everything and choosing to do crazy things that would not be a proper response. We want to obviously do the things that make good sense, like washing our hands and avoiding situations that are going to be leading to the higher possibilities of infection and things of that nature. Make a rational, non-fear-based response that is responding to the world of form in a proper and rational manner, one that is in the middle ground between drinking bleach and licking subway poles. At the same time that we're making that proper response from a human worldly affair, let's also look at how are we responding to this from the inner world, from our true spiritual nature. So how can we respond from our spiritual nature? Well, I think that one of the first things we can do is to recognize that our worldly experiences are impacted and created through our consciousness. It is the actual thoughts that we have as individuals and collectively as all humanity that are creating this outpicturing of the physical world of which we're experiencing. So recognize that we play a role right off the bat in the creation of both the political polarization as well as things such as the coronavirus and the media, which is creating the fear-based messaging which is coming back to us. Recognize that we play a role in the creation of that. The second thing from a spiritual evolutionary perspective is to see that this experience that we're moving through is an opportunity for us to grow, to evolve, to make a different choice, to change our inner thoughts and our inner awareness to a state that creates a different world, one where it's not based in fear and victimhood, one where we're not in the midst of polarization from one person to another, one group of people to another group of people, one where we're not living in a state of fear from viruses and other physical things which would harm our physical nature. So there is that role of moving from victimhood to taking control of our lives individually, and by each of us doing that, stepping into control at the collective level as well. And as we move to that state of taking control and recognizing that there are lessons to learn from this, what lesson are we called to learn? Well, one is a remembrance of the truth of our oneness, that we're all interconnected, that we're all one. Sometimes we have to break down into this fear and into this separation so that we can come back and return to that oneness with a greater sense of awareness. And I think that's the experience that we're going through now, is a challenge in the world of affairs so that we can return in our awareness to that greater sense of oneness. And when we feel that sense of oneness at a greater level, it calls us to the feeling of love. Love not only for ourselves, but for the love for other people on this planet. What it does is allows us to begin with this cascading love that begins within us, cascades out to those other people who are around us and like us, but even beyond that, to the people who are not in our daily world and people who are different from us. And so it breaks down this divisiveness that we currently have on income levels and racial situations and what country we're from, and all of the issues that are out in the world that are leading to the polarization of individuals and to the fear of the other is something that is moving us to a greater sense of our oneness and a call to our loving all that is. You know, as spiritual teacher Hoska Harrison recently wrote, when the mind is full of fear, it's easy for the heart to be clouded. When the mind is full of fear, it's easy for the heart to be clouded. And our heart calls us to a sense of love for one another. Recently, the new spiritual leader for the Centers for Spiritual Living put out a call for us to remember the truth through the coronavirus and all of the world's call to us to be in fear about it. But as he wrote in this recent email, he said, as important it is for us to be well informed and in touch with reliable external sources of information, it's equally important to turn attention inward to the source of our being and to let that interconnection guide us through whatever fear or concern is clamoring for our attention. He goes on to say that this situation is a call for us to remember our oneness. And then he writes, we may well need to keep abreast of national, regional, and local developments regarding COVID-19. And equally important, we can take this opportunity to confidently embrace our teaching of oneness, acknowledging that fear of the virus is part of our shared experience, and that we're called to respond with both compassion and spiritual conviction, and to move forward together with deep recognition of oneness and wholeness. In summary, when we recognize that we are spiritual beings having this human experience, when we put on our hats of understanding of our spiritual evolutionary path, and we are experiencing and recognizing that we are living in these two worlds of the world of physical form, which has political divisiveness and things such as the coronavirus, we also keep in mind that we are these spiritual beings who are growing and evolving in our awareness of oneness. Let's use the challenges of our physical world, our material world these days, be it whatever they are, as recognition and opportunities for us to move beyond a sense of divisiveness, a sense of fear, a sense of victimhood, and to take control of our individual lives, our individual consciousness, and our response to that world by responding with a degree of love and caring concern for more and more people, to stepping beyond the fear and being a force for good and for love on this planet. The call is for each and every one of us to do so, and the time is now. Thanks for watching. Till next time. Thanks for watching. Hope you enjoyed it. There's a similar video right here next to my face if you want to click on it. Also, if you want to get notifications of future videos, be sure to hit that subscribe button on the bottom left-hand corner. If you'd like to contact me, email me at the address on the screen or drop me a comment in the comment field below on YouTube. Thanks.